Welcome to the Books Brothers Podcast, a book club turned podcast where each week we read books, reflect on them as they relate to our life, and connect with each other by sharing our experiences. I'm Thomas.
I'm Rob.
I'm Flez.
I'm Stalen.
I'm Matt.
I'm Garrett.
In today's episode, we will be discussing Chapter 3, The Okinawan Blue Zone.
Unmarried men, are you tired of living like a slob and need some motherly care to do your laundry or bake you a cake after a recent breakup? Look no further. Now introducing Rent-A-Mom. Rent-A-Mom is perfect for those mama's boys that live far from their mothers, but need some womanly care in their lives. Rent-A-Mom is perfect for all situations, meal prepping, hosting parties, or even filling in as a mom when introducing your new love interest to those in your life. Why fake it when you can rent it? Rent-A-Mom.
So in Chapter 3, we learn of the second blue zone mentioned in the book, the blue zone in Okinawa. Okinawa is an island in the Ryukyu chain, which stretches south of Japan. Even though Okinawa is part of Japan, it has a slower-paced, more laid-back culture and a warmer subtropical climate. Some might describe it as the Hawaii of Japan. This chapter focuses on the lifestyle of traditional Okinawan people who have one of the lowest rates of illness from heart disease, cancer, and stroke. We tend to lump Okinawans in with the Japanese, but they're actually a distinct race, largely peasants of the Taiyukyu kingdom, subjugated by the Japanese in the late 19th century. From dealing with starvation to being forced to fight in World War II by their Japanese rulers, the Okinawans, who are now centenarians, and their ancestors endured many hardships over the last couple hundred years. Despite this, or maybe because of it, they are some of the longest living people on Earth. So I had a couple categories that I sort of lumped the Okinawan lifestyle into. We don't necessarily have to talk about these in order, but I feel like a majority of the chapter was spent talking about the lifestyle that kind of surrounded Okinawan's diet. And one of the big things that a lot of these folks had in common that, they were interviewed during the book was that they had a house with a big garden behind it, and gardening was a huge part of the daily routine for a lot of these folks. So I feel like gardening was one of those things that gave you a sense of purpose, forced you to be active every day, and supplied a lot of really good, healthy foods with a lot of nutrients. One of the researchers quoted in the book mentioned something about how to a normal person that just looks like a grocery store in someone's backyard, but to him, based on what he's seeing and how old some of these folks are living, to him it looks more like a pharmacy or something of that nature because of how this food was really acting as a medicine to keep these people going. So thinking about the Okinawan lifestyle, do you guys see yourself being able to do any of the things that you read about in this chapter? Is gardening one of those things that you could do if you had the opportunity?
Yeah, I think this chapter I could relate to more than the Sardinian chapter. Maybe because I'm half Asian and they are also Asian.
Represent.
I think I could get into gardening and this lifestyle that they have. I found it very intriguing. Maybe it's the climate. It's the Hawaii of Japan. That sounds amazing to me. Their diet seems easily doable, eating a lot of soy and plant-based things, having a garden, a medicinal garden, things like that. My grandpa, who definitely is Asian, he loved to garden. And when he had his house, he had this beautiful backyard with 5 different types of fruit trees and just loved to garden. He was in charge of the Rose Society in his city in Naples. And he just found a lot of joy and gave him happiness just to take care of plants and watch them grow. And I found that very inspiring, the way he put his time and energy into it and got a lot out of it as well.
It reminds me, I need to water my plants tonight. Thanks, man.
Need to water my cacti once in a blue moon.
Rob, on that note, I think throughout high school and college, I always thought I would want to have a garden. And I recall growing up, my dad had a garden, and we would do simple stuff. We would do like berries and green peppers and tomatoes and kind of all like the typical staples that you hear about. But now that I live in Arizona, people do garden here, which does surprise me, but it just seems like the ground is not very friendly to it. Pretty much everyone who I know that has a garden, they have like a very intricate like watering system set up for it. And you definitely can do it, but it's something that I've kind of always thought like I would like to garden if possible, like in the future, but probably not if I'm living in Arizona.
Get Daphne out there to start growing you some prickly pear.
There you go. We do have some prickly pears. I've never tried to produce like fruit from them, like to eat them and such. But
I think you can eat the prickly pear itself.
People do
without the prickles, obviously.
Yeah, you take them out. Yeah, now that you say that, I do recall I've had that before, and it does taste like the stalk of a broccoli. You take the spines out, and then you steam it, and it's not that flavorful.
I think a lot of the takeaways for me were from the social cultural, but I did find it's almost sad how much like, okay, there was a blue zone, Okinawans, they live this way, and then bam, McDonald's and fast food infiltrates the culture, and now it's quickly eating away at like all the healthiness of Okinawa, and like the stats are going the wrong way. And it's just amazing how quickly something like fast food can affect the culture.
Yeah, good point, Rob. I was going to mention in this book, they did mention throughout the chapter, Okinawans who don't subscribe to the traditional culture of Okinawa don't reap the same benefits from like a lifespan perspective as those who do. And they mentioned that after World War II, a lot of Western influences like fast food popped up, and that showed a pretty marked change in life expectancies compared to like the old school way of doing things versus modern diets and lifestyles. So yeah, I mean, if that's not a great scientific marker, though, I don't know what is. I mean, that one event, World War II, really is a great way for scientists at least to look at, okay, pre-World War II, here are the life expectancies. Here's how people live. Post-World War II, here's how people live. So I feel like even though that's kind of sad, it also gives a lot of, I guess it kind of gives this data like a lot more legitimacy, you know. Flez, they talked about soy.
Yeah, I was curious what you thought on this too.
Yeah, because like I remember in like college, we would talk about proteins and how, as a dude, you shouldn't eat a lot of soy because it has the phytoestrogens and everything. But I mean, in this chapter, they talk pretty highly of its ability to help you live longer.
Yeah, all the bros right now are like, get out of here.
Come on. Yeah.
Come on. Soy, really? Come on.
I just thought of like the whole soy boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't kept up on a lot of that research. I'm sure some of it's been like not debunked, but moderated in a way, you know.
Well, Flez, correct me here with this though. So from my understanding, soy would contribute to like lower levels of testosterone.
That's what I'm saying.
Is good for heart disease, right? Because like high testosterone increases likelihood of heart disease. Is that?
It's a blanket statement that's hard to say. Like it's
okay. Yeah, I thought I've heard that, but
yeah, I mean, there's like, you know, I remember when we were younger that people were saying soy raises estrogen levels more so than which could, you know, cause you to have gynecomastia and all that kind of stuff. That's what all the bro talk was back then.
Enlargement of the breast, by the way. That's gynecomastia.
Just one?
Just the left one.
Just the left one, yeah. Yeah, but I think if you're having like a moderate amount of soy in your diet, you're probably fine, obviously.
The book said it helped lower cholesterol, which in turn helped, the bad cholesterol, which in turn helped prevent stroke. Is kind of the way it tied soy to life expectancy in the book, at least.
Yeah.
For me, the biggest takeaway on the diet side was eating until you're 80% full. That's something that you can implement immediately. It doesn't take planning of your weekly meals. It doesn't take finding a recipe and buying the ingredients. Especially with my job, one of the great things that we do culturally is we share a meal every day. One of the natural consequences of that is they order out, which my wife is extremely jealous of, and it is great. But like yesterday, it was Costco pizza. That's like the low end of the bar. We have, very high end meals as well. But it's not uncommon in a week to have some sort of chicken tender type cater. So Chick-fil-A or Raising Cane's. And then like a pizza provider. And then there's like on Thursday, we're having a Basil Mediterranean. Cannot wait.
Oh, nice.
And it's going to be incredible. But I've been trying to look at the meals, and yes, even though they're provided and it's great, on days where it's Costco pizza, let me bring my own lunch. And then regardless of what the meal is, stopping before I'm full, when I'm 80% full. And that's been something I've started actually since I've read this chapter. And it's a little bit of an adjustment, but it's really not that much. A lot of this also overlaps for me from the scarcity brain and some of the comfort crisis discussion of how we have a constant innate desire to consume and consume, because historically there was scarce resources, but now there's plentiful. So it kind of overlapped for me reading Scarcity Brain and thinking of, as a society, we can talk about soy or what, insert certain food or
sake with mugwort.
Yeah, but I think a lot of it ultimately can come down to, and this is a fairly ignorant statement, but I don't think it is, comes down to moderation.
Oh, for sure.
And we did talk about that in Scarcity Brain, the food chapter, where a lot of it can just come down to like, we have all these diets. There's dozens of diets that people can do. And yet, as a society, we're becoming more and more unhealthy. There's not a lack of information. It's a lack of self-control or a lack of just understanding some of our body's limitations or tendencies, perhaps. So eating to 80% full was pretty striking to me. And it's been something that I've tried to be intentional about, which is hard when you're served really good food every day at lunch.
Yeah, I found myself saying Hara Hachibu before meals after reading this
Really?
chapter. Yeah.
There you go.
Just not out loud, just to myself.
Last night I was eating and I wasn't done, but I was like, I'm 80% of the way done right now.
Yeah.
And I push myself over 100%, which I constantly do with many meals. It's like I'm always going over 100%, it feels like.
I just love the visual of thinking about like a petite 102 or 103-year-old Japanese woman sitting at a meal saying, I will only eat until I'm 80% full. Like that image is very powerful, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because it's like two peanuts. I was just going to ask, how many of you guys with kids have said, clean your plate, make sure you eat everything on your plate. Be a plate cleaner, be part of the clean plate club, guys. Come on.
I mean, I haven't said it in those terms.
That was what I heard growing up over and over.
Having kids makes Hara Hachibu 8 out of 10 or 80% so much harder, because when they don't finish their food, I want to eat it for them. It's just it's delicious food.
So
it's
what
on the
about
table.
You come to the table and with nothing on your plate, Matt, and then you just wait and see what they don't eat.
That could work, but it would take like an hour for them to finish up. So,
Matt, I actually do that, Matt. I take a smaller serving than I otherwise would, because I give my kids, I know they can't eat as much as we put on their plate, but sometimes they're starving. Like sometimes they will crush some spaghetti. It's shocking. And at the age they're at, it's pretty common where they'll eat a lot at one of the three meals, but not on the others. So I don't push the finish your plate. It's more of like, can I have dessert? It's like, no, you haven't had the main course. That's where I'm like, you gotta, or like our kids, I laugh. We actually have some positive problems. My kids only want to eat edamame. And it's like, dude, you got to have like the main course. Like I only want to eat grapes. It's like, okay, you got to have some other food. You can't just have grapes tonight. So those are good problems to have. But yeah, I'll intentionally, Matt, take a smaller serving because I know they won't finish. Like, so tonight there was soup and I didn't have a full bowl. And then I just cleaned up their bowls when they were done.
That's a good idea. My girls also love edamame so much.
Yes. High in protein. I learned.
Soy.
Oh, full circle.
I was just kind of mentioning the way I grew up hearing that because I do feel like it was my grandparents' generation that really pushed that the hardest. And I think they learned that from their parents who came from a place of scarcity going through the Great Depression and everything else. And so it's funny how like something that's meant to help people grow big and strong and be building habits that they need to survive, 2 generations later is pushed on a generation that does not need to think like that. And rather they should think only eat until you're 80% full. And I just feel like maybe it's the next generation that will learn that lesson finally after this big lag that we've had in, watching people eat too much in America, the obesity rates, everything else. I mean, it all starts with like, what are the habits that you kind of grow up with? How much eating is okay versus too much, and hopefully, at the end of the day, we all do land on this 80% full because everybody knows once you're 100% full, you've overeaten. Yeah. I think that's a good rule.
Let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsors.
Mothers, are you tired of always having to be that one that your child clings to? Do you just need a day off, but want to ensure that your child is comforted and cared for? Now introducing the Mommy Boob. The Mommy Boob is a prosthetic boob that can be worn around your husband's chest and resembles what your child is used to. Call right now and we'll throw in the Mommy Face. The Mommy Face is a breathable mask that has your face digitally printed on it and comforts your child no matter who is behind the mask. With Mommy Boob and Mommy Mask, it's like Mommy never left.
And now back to the show.
I enjoyed like some of the other social and cultural ones as well, like the Ikigai, which is like, what's your reason for waking up? I attributed that to like a word that I'm more familiar with, which is like, what is your vocation? What's your purpose bigger than what you do for work? Like I'm a husband, for example. And then like the Moai, I know I texted you guys when I was reading, but the Moai, if I'm saying that correctly, just like the support system, the friend group that was really more of like a economic type of support system. With Marianne's surgery, we had a meal train set up for us and we had meals for like 2 weeks straight, almost to the point where it was like, oh my gosh, like we can't eat it all, which goes against the Hara Hachi Bu rule. But just feeling that love and support, and then also like looking at this book club in that way. I know we want to prioritize the brotherhood component as well, but just made me reflect. And I know I shared with you guys, but it like made me reflect more on like how we be there for each other rather than constantly pressing record. So it's something that really stuck with me this chapter.
So I guess I want to make sure people know like how this was described in the book. But Ikigai was something that it seemed like everybody kind of talked about on a pretty regular basis. It's a term that, like Rob said, kind of is like your reason for waking up in the morning, your purpose, what gives you meaning in your life. And I don't know how often we really talk about that to people, whether it's friends, family, or otherwise, or even think about it or kind of ruminate on that.
Well, it goes back to also like what I said in previous book. When people ask you, what do you do? So many people are like, tell you where they work.
Right. That's the default.
That's like part of your purpose, but that like I don't wake up every day trying to, I know my purpose is bigger than transporting chocolate, right?
I don't know. Really important. But yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's just funny because I feel like we really don't look at things like that a lot of times. If someone asks you your purpose, I think, okay, you kind of roll your eyes. Why are you trying to get all philosophical, And people don't really want to talk about it, even though it is pretty dang important in terms of kind of having your life together in a way where you're happy with what's going on. You're happy with those steps you're making. And then Moai, I think is how you pronounce it, maybe. That lifelong group of friends, that was something that in the book was described as these centenarians having people that was, about any time that they'd go to visit these folks, they'd be with other people. They'd be with their crew, if you will.
Homies.
And they would have intentional meetings like every day or a couple days or whatever to hang out. And again, like with you guys, pretty much we hang out once a week virtually, but I don't have a lot of folks that physically I have plans to hang out with on a regular basis,
Yeah. I think one thing about the Moai, we're not going to say it right. Moai.
Say it with the Japanese accent. Moai.
Moai.
You just said it in a deep voice.
Have you heard Japanese men talk?
Oh, I guess. Yeah. These are Okinawan.
Matt, you didn't get the Okinawan dialect right there. But that it's that structured, scheduled time every week. And I remember one of the really formative things that I remember listening to, or I think it was in a podcast or maybe something I was reading. And this was probably like 4 or 5 years ago. It was before we started doing this. And it was a guy who studied, he was a researcher of relationships, and he had done a lot of research on male friendships in particular. And he talked about some things like how for men, it takes something like 200 hours of time together to truly develop a relationship. For women, it only takes something like 50 hours. And so in college, we all became friends in college. It's pretty easy to get 200 hours together. You're basically living together. But post-college, obviously, it's a lot harder. Could be years. Women, 50 hours wouldn't take quite as long, and that kind of thing. But I remember one thing that he talked about was the importance of like scheduling routine times for friendship. And I remember it just like really stuck with me. And it was something that for me, it was an impetus of like why I wanted to start doing something like this more regularly. And I remember the researcher saying that to schedule something might make you think that you're not going to enjoy it as much because it's like kind of like boring. Spontaneity is supposed to be really what's like, makes things fun and exciting. But he's like, on the counter, the longer you do something like this, you get to enjoy the activity both before, during, and after. So you're like looking forward to it and excited before, you enjoy it during, and then like afterwards the reflection. Whereas like more spontaneous activities obviously can be way, just as fun. And, I think we often think are more fun, but usually with those, you don't have like that pre-excitement as much as just like the excitement during and the excitement after. So it's just something I wanted to share because, I think in the context of like, thinking about a bunch of elderly women hanging out of a Moai, I feel like we saw in the Sardinian blue group, it's the older men that are hanging out routinely. And I think it's just super important. It's been something that's been really helpful for me personally.
Even in the chapter too, one of the ladies was like, when we don't meet, it's like it throws me off and it affects me, and just shows like their dependence upon it too, because they know that it's life-giving as well. So that's great insight.
On the social cultural category, I had something about the way that our culture views aging versus the Okinawan culture does. In the book, it mentioned that in Japan and Okinawa, they measure age more using kind of the social and environmental measures rather than the biological measures. I feel like that probably lends itself to having people age a lot more gracefully, accept it as something that's a good thing rather than just a bad thing, and probably live a lot longer because they're more likely to be incorporated into different, like more parts of the community or the culture rather than our culture, which kind of feels like it pushes older people out as they're less relevant in like a popular culture productivity kind of way.
I was trying to find this graph and I just found it. If you just search in Google happiness by age graph,
yes,
there's a result that shows 6 different countries, I guess 5, and then one graph groups in Latin American countries. And it's very consistent other than Russia, where the US, the UK, Germany, China, and Latin American countries, there's a U-shaped curve where people report getting progressively unhappy. It bottoms out in like the 40s, your 4th decade. I guess in Germany, it bottoms out in your 5th decade, it looks like. But then it's happiness up until death.
I think for American men, it's in your 30s. Is because I've heard this kind of research.
Oh, really?
And so, I think we're like in that right now, right?
Thank God. Let's get this over with. Man, finally, I turned 33 in a month and a half. 7 more years until I'm happy. We got this.
It's your Jesus year, brother.
Well, not according to Garrett's research, though.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah, you got to wait till you're 4. According to Reddit. No, but I mean, just no, I just think it's like thinking about purpose, thinking about friendships, happiness. There's natural challenges that are going to happen in life that across countries, across cultures, again, other than Russia, where they get progressively unhappy and it doesn't rebound, which is sad. Aside from,
I should be laughing.
No, I mean, we can laugh, but it is also just sad, right? Like to not rebound. But there are things that it's like, there's just going to be challenges in life, but that doesn't mean that's the end. And then thinking about some of the practices that we implemented specifically during really tragic times like the pandemic, where we're now seeing further fruit of those decisions and consequences of those decisions to isolate and separate from other people and separate from community, where depression's going up, suicide's going up. I mean, I could talk at length, but my wife's like least favorite patient population of like the 18 years is like the teenage years, because I don't know how factual it is, but I asked her to gauge it, and she's like, it's probably a safe bet to say 9 out of 10 teenagers that she sees are depressed, anxious, overweight, and struggle at some level with suicide ideation. Like, it's just an insanely high number. And it's a very specific patient population. It's not representative of the whole, but it's still terrible. And there are a lot of things that are contributing towards not having Moai, not having Ikigai that we could learn from the Okinawans.
It's also TikTok.
Yeah.
I'm serious. All the facial changes you can make on your phone, then you look in the mirror and it's not the same. Yeah. Dude, I've talked about suicide and as it relates to men, but for female girls that are like in their teenage years, that's gone up an insane amount. It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, there's more cyberbullying and stuff with girls than boys, and you're on social more, and
it's a big problem. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know, Thomas, I guess it's the pessimist in me, but when you said earlier, like, as time goes on and we're getting more educated about this, like maybe the next generation will change. It's hard for me to believe that sometimes, like being pessimistic, because I feel like there's more chips that are stacking against us that we're going to have to fight upstream against to push away from the comfort lifestyle, the just get on my phone and endlessly scroll. Some of the things that don't promote health are a lot easier, right? It's a lot tastier and easier to eat a $2 bag of Doritos than it is to buy a $2 head of lettuce and make a salad. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I do think generationally people learn from the biggest mistakes of the previous generations and do make some sort of a change. They might drop the ball in some other areas where the previous generation was good at, but I feel like you can already see with social media, at least, a lot of the things we got used to social media wise are just totally been dropped by the youngest at this point. Instagram, Facebook, they don't use that. And then TikTok's the new one. But I've also heard of a lot of younger kids that don't use anything because they're just tired of it. They don't like it. They watch their friends kind of get wrapped up in things and have all those kind of symptoms or experiences like you mentioned that are negative. And that's pretty cool. It kind of comes full circle where they're like, okay, I guess I'll be the weird one and try to get out of this, just see what it's like on the outside world instead of in my phone. But I'm keeping a little bit of hope. We'll see. I
appreciate that. I really do. I respect that. I need to be more optimistic and hopeful, just in life in general.
Well, I don't know. I guess you could also tie this back, the optimism back to this chapter, honestly, because I feel like they did talk about all the hardships that these Okinawans went through that are 100 years old now. And it seemed like they had an attitude about it like, yeah, that really tough, what we would call trauma today, really affected me at the time, but I don't identify with it anymore. And I don't really want to talk about it either. I just want to be happy now. And I just want to talk about now. And I just want to live in the moment with the people I like, right? And there's something to be said for that. I think in today's culture, we do hang on to a lot of things and identify with them. And I don't know if it's a defense mechanism for a lot of people, or if it's just something that it's like kind of misery loves company kind of deal. But I think there's definitely a lot to learn from that more optimistic outlook of, you know, how much energy and time you need to spend thinking about certain negative parts of your life.
Post-traumatic growth.
Yeah, or just, you know, one of the headings in the chapter was the power of now. And anybody who's read that book will know kind of exactly the power that just living in the moment and trying not to be too wrapped up in things past or future can give you.
It feels like there's also probably some truth in that through those kind of dealings that, you know, suffering a lot of times can really produce a lot of resilience. And, you know, maybe it's not quite as obvious in like, so in this chapter, like when, you know, he talked about it with some of like the elderly folks, they didn't really want to talk about that experience, but, you know, in a lot of ways it probably did and help them produce a lot of mental toughness and just ability to endure.
Yeah, I mean, you go through a situation like a lot of these folks did in Okinawa where you're pretty much fighting for your life during World War II, or you're starving or whatever, and then the rest of your life you have that to look back on and think, you know, that's my baseline kind of rock bottom. And this, what I'm dealing with now in the present, is so much better than that. I mean, there's almost nothing worse than that. So it's kind of like, if they don't dwell on it too much, I guess they are in a better place because they went through that, because they can look back and be more grateful in the present. Oh yeah, they talked about vitamin D too. I thought that was kind of interesting because we kind of demonized the sun, talk about how it causes cancer, but they were talking about how it's good to an extent. Does anybody else have anything to say about the Okinawan chapter at least?
Yeah, I mean, I think back as we go back to just that first Blue Zone, like the, you know, personal takeaways, and I think the Moai, as Rob had mentioned, we've already talked about a lot, was a big takeaway of like the importance of having that group. And I think even, you know, for those who are listening, just in the encouragement to find that group, you know, be the one to initiate that and make it a regular commitment to hang out with folks. It's something that, you know, we all started doing 2 years ago, and it's been good for us.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Books Brothers podcast. Join us next week as we discuss Chapter 4, The American Blue Zone. If you haven't yet, go out and get the book, The Blue Zones by Dan Buettner, so you can better follow along with us. If you have enjoyed listening or benefited from our conversation, please subscribe, give us a review, and share with a friend that you want to connect deeper with. Lastly, we would love to hear your thoughts. You can reach us by email at connect@booksbrotherspodcast.com or on Instagram at booksbrotherspodcast. Until next week, read, reflect, and connect.